Welcome everyone to Dr. John Bedker's Leadership Podcast, the podcast focused on leadership. The episode will begin shortly. Thank you so much for tuning in. Enjoy the podcast.
Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Dr. John Bedker Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, John Bedker. Well, we're certainly living in troubled times and turbulent times where leaders are revealing themselves for who they are. I've spent several podcasts talking about the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and his lack of leadership in these perilous times. Times when we need leadership perhaps more than ever. And rather than continue to just go on and on and on about Donald Trump, which certainly is worthy, I thought it would be important to focus on those that he is focused on, the people that he would like to get rid of, to remove. There is an acronym, RAGE, R-A-G-E, RAGE. Terrible word, right? It evokes all kinds of vitriol, emotion, rage. Well, RAGE stands for Remove All Government Employees. Yeah. What an acronym. RAGE. Remove all government employees. Well, today I'm going to talk about one of those government employees that Trump is so bent on removing, of deconstructing the administrative state. Somehow that seems a huge priority and daily moves further and further along in his rage to remove government employees. I'm going to talk about a book today. I'm going to read from it, a fair amount from it, because these authors throughout this book just are so eloquent. They do a fine job of talking about people that are exemplary leaders, people that truly are doing the right thing, which I believe is the call of all leaders. So the book is by, Michael Lewis. It's called Who is Government? The Untold Story of Public Service, and in particular, public servants. So Michael Lewis reached out to people who he considers the best writers of our time. Asked them to answer that question, who is government? To tell an untold story about public service and about a public servant. So here's the flap cover to the book. I'll read just the first paragraph. The government is a vast, complex system that Americans pay for, rely upon, and rebel against, dismiss, and celebrate. It's also our shared resource for addressing the biggest problems of society. And it's made up of people, mostly unrecognized and uncelebrated, doing work that can be deeply consequential and beneficial to everyone. Well, that's the inside flap cover of Michael Lewis's new book. It's just from an anthology, a group of opinion writers. Wow, why would a person seek to destroy this? Rage, to remove all government employees. Well, today we're going to talk about one exemplary leader. A leader you likely have never heard of. A leader that for years, decades, has been a sentinel. I'm only going to read a portion of this piece. And this piece is written by Casey Cep. Just like it sounds, C-E-P. It is called, as I mentioned, the Sentinel. It's about Ronald Walters. He's the manager of the National Cemetery Administration. Not very sexy, right? Isn't the kind of thing you'd run to and say, geez, I really would like to know about that. But I think as we go through just a snippet of the piece by Casey Cep, you'll see how important, how significant, and how exemplary this leader is. The beginning of the article is catching. Let me quote. "There was no room for a parachute and nowhere to hide from the devil. Cradling 2 machine guns, Staff Sergeant Robert Ferris Jr. was curled up inside the ball turret, a 3.5-foot plexiglass sphere that hung like a snow globe from the belly of a B-17 bomber. It was 4 days before Christmas in 1942, and he was barreling toward the Normandy coast with 8 other airmen and orders to attack a German factory in Romilly-sur-Seine. Ferris was 20 years old, 3,000 miles from home, when the Flak and the Luftwaffe found him. Trapped in the ball turret, all he could do was watch as smoke spiraled up from the engines and the plane spiraled down to the ground. The tail gunner parachuted out and was taken prisoner, but Ferris and the other 7 crew members died when the B-17, named Danilin, that was after the pilot's parents, crashed near the shores of the Seine. What bodies could be recovered could not be identified. They were buried in the graveyard of a nearby village, then moved after the war to the American cemetery, overlooking Omaha Beach. Above each of their graves, a marble cross read, quote, "Here rests in honored glory a comrade in arms, known but to God," end quote. For 8 decades, Staff Sergeant Ferris remained an unknown soldier on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. But a few years ago, the Defense Department and the American Battle Monuments Commission exhumed remains from the crew of the Danilin at the National American Cemetery in Normandy. An elite team of forensic anthropologists with the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency studied those remains as they do hundreds of other such cases each year, identifying veterans of the wars in Vietnam and Korea and occasionally World War II. When they turned their attention to the ball turret gunner, his parents and siblings had long since died. So a niece, so young she never met him, provided the DNA to verify that it was her uncle who had lost his life all those decades ago, 82 years after his plane was shot down. Ferris finally came home. Earlier this year, that niece and her neighbors in New Bern, North Carolina, gave him a hero's welcome. A parade of motorcycles escorted him from the airport. An avenue of flags lined the approach to the funeral home and the cemetery, and all along the route, he was saluted by fellow veterans, men and women who knew that no matter when or where or how they died, they too would be buried with such ceremony. Ferris was laid to rest in New Bern National Cemetery a few days before Memorial Day, and when the community returned to celebrate this holiday, among the speakers honoring his service was Ronald E. Walters. This is the man we're going to talk about today, folks. Ronald E. Walters, who isn't from North Carolina. He isn't even a veteran. But he leads the National Cemetery Administration, which had arranged the burial and with full military honors for Ferris and placed the headstone that already marked his grave, not to mention the 7,500 others that are perfectly aligned with it. The NCA, the National Cemetery Administration, maintains the pristine, precisely mowed grass between every row of graves in every section of the cemetery, provides the directory of grave sites so that anyone can find Ferris's final resting place or any other. Make sure all the flags are flying. Every marker and memorial is legible. Every road is pothole free. Every trash can is empty. Every flower garden is weeded. Every mulch bed is mulched. Every tree and shrub is trimmed. And every edge is freshly edged. Walters and his 2,300 colleagues bury more than, get this folks, 140,000 veterans and their family members every year. And they tend to the perpetual memory of nearly 4 million other veterans, from the Revolutionary War to the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, interred in 155 national cemeteries all over the United States. It doesn't matter if you were a seaman recruit who died without any family or a 4-star general who lived into your 80s. If you serve this country, then the NCA serves you. The work that Walters does would be admirable, no matter how well he did it. But as it turns out, he and his colleagues do their work better than any other organization in the country. Think about that, folks. And think about the rage. Remove all government employees. Walters does this work better than any other organization in the country. Back to the article. Quote, not just better than other cemeteries and funeral homes, better than any organization, period. 7 consecutive times, the NCA has received the highest rating of any entity, public or private, in the American Consumer Satisfaction Index. Developed at the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business, the ACSI, as it's called, has been the gold standard for measuring consumer experiences for the past 30 years. Its satisfaction scores range from 0 to 100, with Costco pulling a whopping 85, Apple an 83, McDonald's 71, Facebook an underwhelming 69. The average ACSI score for federal agencies is 68. But the NCA most recently scored 97. Yeah, 97. The highest rating in the survey's history, except for the last time the NCA participated, where it also scored 97. Well, the leader of this organization, Walters, has a lot to do with these satisfaction scores, but he himself isn't really satisfied with them because he believes that NCA owes themselves and those they serve a perfect score. We only get one chance to get it right, Walters says. To that end, he has spent the past 2 decades obsessing over everything from the lifespan of a backhoe to how many days it takes to manufacture and engrave a headstone, working with scientists to determine what chemicals best to clean marble. This list goes on and on and on. This attention to detail, this focus on doing the right thing, not once, not here, not there, but everywhere, in every minute detail and step of the process that gets someone to be buried in a military cemetery. This is perhaps the most striking thing about Ron Walters. His agency is one of the world's leading experts on death, but he is an expert on how to live, which is to say, from our leadership perspective, how to do the right thing. Let me skip ahead. Where did he come from? We always talk about that background. I do think it's important. Quickly, Walters chose to go to Georgetown University, double majored in government, English, was named a Baker Scholar, found himself inducted in just about every honor society on campus. But while he befriended some of the Jesuits there at Georgetown, he soon realized the priesthood wasn't for him. Public service was. And after graduation, he enrolled in a master's program in public administration at George Washington University, which had cooperative education agreements with various federal agencies. As part of his studies, Walters was assigned an internship at Veterans Affairs. I thought it was just going to be a summer job, he said. That was 39 years ago, and except for a very brief stint in the Office of Personnel Management, Walters has been with the VA ever since. So think about this incredible need by the President of the United States to remove all government employees, to attack agency, department, after another, summarily dismissing, letting go, firing, under the auspices that they're not needed, they're not contributing. They are contributing to waste, fraud, and abuse. Nothing could be further from the truth as you read these stories, real stories of their real lives. One more piece about the cemeteries in general. The first national cemeteries were established during the Civil War, when President Abraham Lincoln launched an extensive campaign to scout battlefields and beyond for hundreds of thousands of fallen soldiers. Ever since, we have honored those who gave us the last full measure of devotion by bringing them home to their next of kin or burying them with honor in a military cemetery. Color guards, taps, marble headstones, military escorts, flags draped with coffins. These traditions inform us of who we are as Americans, our identity. National cemeteries are here for a huge, huge purpose. What we want to do is not only recognize the fallen, but use it as a symbol for who we are as Americans, for those that served their country in uniform, for the purposes of winning peace, by those that would stand up to battle to ensure future peace. The idea that we would not need people to maintain our cemeteries, to maintain those properties, recognizing those that served. The article goes on to say this. Let me quote just a bit more. It's sometimes difficult to know what makes a nation distinctive, to recognize which among our traditions and habits are essential to our collective identity. But repatriating the war dead is the deepest expression of the commitment we make to those who serve this country. A quote from Ron Walters himself. There is no place where the price of freedom is more visible than in a national cemetery. Ron Walters said that. So, it's a unique place, an egalitarian place, whether you are the lowest enlisted or the highest admiral or general. Makes no difference. Makes no difference. Every person treated similarly, equally, with respect and devotion, regardless of rank or standard. Certainly nothing to do with political party affiliation, gender, race. None of that matters. We are all equal, as our Constitution says, with rights. And national cemeteries do that perhaps better than anyone. Let me close by giving a remark that has been repeated over and over throughout this article, which, again, I'm only reading you a very, very short snippets of. Here's the closing piece from this article. Just about everyone I talked to about Walters told me something similar. They could remember specific encounters where he gently illuminated a professional blind spot, recite Ron-isms as they became to be known over his many decades of service, then impress some aspect of their work and recount conversations where his emotional intelligence helped them understand something about their own life. One of the people interviewed for this article said, I'm quoting, "I think people leave every interaction with Ron feeling better about themselves. People who come into contact with him are inspired, and to me, that's the mark of a great leader." Think about that, folks, in our leadership journeys, in your leadership journey. This commitment to excellence, this commitment to collectivism, to egalitarianism, to recognize those that serve, not to remove them, not to degrade them, disparage them, defund them, but to recognize that there are people. We're talking today about one person, Ron Walters, and the National Cemetery Association. Don't even know what that is and what it's about. But folks, I encourage you to seek out this book, Who is Government?, to understand these untold stories of public servants and public service, which our current president is seeking to destroy. People everywhere are doing their best. Not perfect, doing their best. Ron Walters is a glowing example of an exemplary leader doing his best. Okay, everyone, thank you so much. Remember to recognize those that are doing great things. However small and insignificant, every one of them is large, and every one of them should be celebrated. Okay, take care. We'll talk soon.
Thank you for tuning in to Dr. John Bedker's Leadership Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please tell your friends, and, of course, please follow our podcast and subscribe. Thank you again for tuning in.